Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cambridge Union Society. A quick notice before we start. Filming, photography and recording of any kind are strictly prohibited, so please do not do it. If I suspect you of recording, we will have to remove you from the chamber. Also, after the talk, there will be a chance to ask Julian some questions. Please keep these relevant to the material he's going to speak about this evening, which is the diplomatic cables. For legal reasons, he can't speak about anything that's not relevant to the talk tonight. So, the Cambridge Union Society is joined this afternoon by Julian Assange. Julian is the founder and face of WikiLeaks, the whistleblower website with the stated purpose of creating open governance. He has published material about Guantanamo Bay procedures, as well as the Iraq war logs, Afghan war diary, and the US embassy cables. He received the Amnesty International Media Award in 2009 for publishing material about extrajudicial killings in Kenya, and was the reader's choice for Time magazine's Person of the Year 2010. He'll be speaking tonight about the diplomatic cables and the response to them, so please really welcome Julian Assange.
Thank you. Well, it's always a privilege to have an audience, but I had hoped, to just come and speak to a few students, because Cambridge is not so far from where I am under house arrest in Norfolk, and it might be good to finally get out of the house. But everywhere I go seems to turn into a great big opera. Now, in speaking to the union founders earlier tonight, sorry, not founders. I'm a founder. In speaking to the union board, how do you call it? Committee. I understand that this union was founded in 1815 as a result of censorship here at Cambridge University. And students needed a place to speak about the matters of their concern in that time, and so founded the union as a place where provosts were not permitted. And this badge up here reminds people that when they leave this hall, they are entering back into the big bad world of Cambridge. So it seems to me that this restriction on people not recording, what I am doing is a bit rough, although actually I understand and support it to a degree. That is, if we did not have it to some degree, this would simply turn into a press conference, and there would be satellite vans outside and lots of press here. So it is not an attempt, at least on our behalf, to stop you recording. Rather, it is simply an attempt to prevent this thing becoming a complete and utter circus. First of all, so I have some news about today. So one piece of news is I understand that Dearlove, who is the chair of the Union Board of Trustees and the former head of MI6, spoke here in February, 14th, is that correct? In February, and was recorded and spoke extensively about us and some of our work, and in part incorrectly. And a secret recording was made of those activities and spliced with a reply, not by us but by one of our supporters, and pasted to YouTube. And I would encourage you to all go and have a look at that, except YouTube has removed it, presumably as a result of a request by Dearlove. And so that brings me to something that will occur throughout this talk, which is the privatization of censorship, in where the field of public discourse occurs on private land when it occurs on the internet. And that archives that are historically important to all of us, and become our intellectual record, are no longer something that is safe, and no longer something that we can build our discourse on, and indeed build our civilization on, because they are being ripped out from under us at the very moment we are trying to cite them. George Orwell said that he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. And what he was getting at was interference in the great encyclopedia of the Soviet Union shortly after Beria's fall from grace. Beria was the chief of the NKVD in 1954. That encyclopedia was amended to have the Beria section ripped out and replaced by a section on Bering Strait in order to pad out the content. And letters were sent to libraries around the Soviet Union and the rest of the Russian-speaking world, instructing them to paste in a new version of events. Of course, it is laughable, and I'm telling you this story now because it was so clear and obvious what was going on. But now that is not the case. All over the world, information of historical importance and political importance, that which we build our civil and political life on, is disappearing because it is in centralized archives owned by private companies. Once in a time of popular revolt, which for all intents and purposes could be speaking about the events in Tunisia or the events in Egypt, but are in fact much closer to home. Critics of radical publishers said, "They have cast all the mysteries and secrets of governments, both by the kings and parliaments, before the vulgar like pearls before the swine, and have taught both the soldiery and people alike to look so far into them as to ravel back all governments to the first principles of nature. They have made the people thereby so curious and so arrogant that they will never find the humility to submit to civil rule." That is a statement made in London in the 1640s, at a time of popular revolt, spurred on by radical publishers. What we have been doing is part of that great tradition. It is simply how you be a radical publisher in the 21st century. And that revolt spurned in the UK was largely to a degree a result of the printing press and of groups trying to educate each other with its fruits. And we can see something now occurring like that in the United States, not in the United States. We can see something like that occurring now in the Middle East, and perhaps in the United States, and certainly in Australia, and perhaps in the United Kingdom, and in countries in South America that have been publishing the diplomatic cables. So I thought I would go through just a brief chronology of these events, because a lot of the inner story has never been told, and while it would take far too long to tell the backstory, we can perhaps tell part of the story, the most, I think, important part of the story that has not been told. After our publishing of the Iraq War logs, which exposed the deaths of 109,000 people in Iraq, the precise times and geographic locations, and often the weaponry and military units involved, we geared up to try and get out 250,000 US diplomatic cables. At that time, US intelligence was aware that we had in our back pockets, that material, that I personally was involved in directing how it should be released. And as a result, I had to travel with great care all over the world, and our people had to exercise great care. And we set up a media alliance with many difficulties and uncertainties and betrayals and carelessness. But as a result, on the 29th of November, we were victorious in our first goal, which was to get the start of that material out to the public in a way that would have what we hope to be maximum political impact. Those 5 big media organizations were The Guardian, Der Spiegel, Le Monde, the New York Times, and El País of Spain. Subsequently, we have expanded the number of groups we have been working with, and it now covers 50, spreading across the world. Media organizations, small radical publishers, and non-profit organizations. And today, India went 6 million words of cables about India, shaking the Indian Parliament as we speak. Also today, another organization, an organization that was with us early on, but then brutally attacked. And that organization is Al-Akbar. They are the highest quality print publisher in the Middle East. They run out of Lebanon. And on the 1st of December, Al-Akbar started publishing US diplomatic cables and started writing stories in Arabic. Also at that time, Al-Massi Al-Yum in Cairo started publishing diplomatic cable stories in Arabic. Immediately, Al-Akbar was attacked by denial of service attacks. Even prior to releasing the cables, we received denial of service attacks from thousands of computers all over the world in many different forms. There are now, as a result, over 1,500 WikiLeaks servers run by us and our supporters in every continent and in nearly every country. Reporters Sans Frontiers themselves run an entire copy of our Cablegate material. After Al-Akbar produced a story, a cable about corruption in Saudi Arabia and in Tunisia and in Egypt, and the role of Israel in Lebanon, and details about the Hezbollah fiber optic network in Lebanon. Its servers were redirected to a Saudi sex site. Now, when I first heard this, I thought this cannot be true. There cannot possibly be a Saudi sex site. But apparently it is true. And for a 24-hour period, everyone who went to see Al-Akbar just got their Saudi sex site. With the intervention of the Foreign Ministry of Lebanon, those domain records for Al-Akbar were redirected back to Al-Akbar servers, which then came under more aggressive hacker attacks of a sophistication that makes me believe that a state intelligence service was involved. And that was the end of Al-Akbar's publishing. Those cables and those stories disappeared from the net, from Al-Akbar, but they were spread and published by others. Al-Akbar was banned by the Tunisian government. WikiLeaks was banned by the Tunisian government. And computer hackers supportive to our endeavours moved into the Tunisian government and redirected many, and perhaps all, Tunisian government websites to WikiLeaks, to its cables about Ben Ali and that regime. On the 17th of December, 26-year-old Mohamed Bouzazi, who lived in the provincial town of Sidi and had a university degree but no work, who had been trying to operate a small fruit-selling stall and was not able to pay bribes sufficient to get a certificate to operate, set himself on fire in protest, and on the 4th of January he died in hospital. His act took what was an online understanding about what was happening in Tunisia and an online war that was happening between publishers like us and Al-Akbar and our opponents into physical form and into a very emotional act that everyone could understand. As a result, protests grew within Tunis and a popular uprising was born. But there are other aspects of those Tunisian cables, as there were with the Egyptian material we released, which have a bearing on these events that is not obvious. We have always wanted to try and expose corrupt or abusive or conspiratorial governments and pseudo-governments such as giant corporations to their peoples, so those people can understand in which way they should attempt to build a better society or attack or defend themselves. However, the Tunisian cables showed clearly that the US, if it came down to it, if it came down to a fight between the military on the one hand and Ben Ali's political regime on another, the US would probably support the military. And that is something that changed part of the dynamics in the competition between reformists in Tunisia and the Ben Ali regime. And it is something also that must have caused neighbouring countries of Tunisia some pause. That is, that if they militarily intervened, they may not be on the same side as the United States. Similarly, when it came to Egypt, what we saw was a regional phenomenon. Egypt shares a border with Tunisia and it shares a border with Libya. In understanding and being advised by our people in those countries that we should take a regional approach, we started as fast as we could, with the assistance of the Telegraph and some of our other partners, to pump out information about the principal players in Egypt and in Libya and in Bahrain. Not just so the people of those countries could know what was going on, because many of them already knew what was going on in great and grotesque detail, but rather so it would not be possible for the West to stand up and support the principles involved. So it would not be possible for those other countries in the region to support and intervene because they were so busy dealing with fallout themselves at a domestic level. And I still think that this is the way the Arab Spring must be approached, is as a whole region phenomenon. Because Saudi Arabia has supported many of these dictatorships, as has Israel, as has the United States, and as has France, in their quest for what they call stability, but what people on the ground call dictatorship. And understanding that that whole world is a network of interconnecting powers at the diplomatic level, at the military level, at the intelligence level, and also on the other side between civil activists, is what can enable us and everyone else to cut selective ties, to cut spare resources that could be used to prop up one regime by another. So the name of that paper that started publishing again today, after a period where it could not, is Al-Akbar. So it has started publishing today on Lebanon and on Saudi and other events in the region. I have seen an interesting series of events in the US response to the Egyptian revolution and the US response to us. Earlier this year, Joseph Biden called me a high-tech terrorist. 2 weeks later, he said that Mubarak was not a dictator and should not stand down. As a result of releasing cables about Suleiman, the US and Israel's preferred option for a regime takeover in Egypt, as a result of releasing cables about Mubarak's approval of Suleiman's torture, it was not possible for Joseph Biden to say that. It was not possible for Hillary Clinton to publicly come out and support the Mubarak regime. And after that regime fell, Hillary Clinton came out and said, well, it's all a result of good American work. It's all a result of two great American companies, Twitter and Facebook. And yes, they did play a part, although not nearly as large a part as Al Jazeera. But the guide produced by Egyptian revolutionaries, the most organised form of which centred around the ultras, the Egyptian soccer clubs, says on the first page, do not use Facebook and Twitter, and says on the last page, do not use Facebook and Twitter. And there is a reason for that. It's because there was actually a Facebook revolt in Cairo 3 or 4 years ago. It was very small. It was more a small protest. And after it, Facebook was used to round up all the principal participants, who were then beaten, interrogated, in some cases incarcerated. So while the internet in some ways has an ability to let us know at an unprecedented level what government is doing and let us cooperate with each other to hold repressive governments and repressive corporations to account, it is also the greatest spying machine that the world has ever seen. It is not a technology that favours freedom of speech. It is not a technology that favours human rights, and is not a technology that favours civil life. Rather, it is a technology that, on the one hand, can be used to set up a totalitarian spying regime, the likes of which we have never seen. Or, on the other hand, if taken by us, and taken by activists, and taken by all those who wish a different trajectory for a technological world, it can be something that we all hope for. But that battle between people that want to use the internet as a tool of liberation and those tremendous organisations that want to use the internet as a tool of control, mass control, is not over. It is only just beginning. For Egypt, I was concerned that perhaps we had only seen a shifting of chairs in the top of the political regime. And although we had, and others campaigning, had knocked out Suleiman as a new puppet for Mubarak, that he was still there in the transitionary government, the head of the army, which is described in the cables as Mubarak's poodle, was head of the transitionary government. Perhaps there had not been, in fact, a real revolution. But, in fact, at every level of Egyptian society, there has been mini-revolutions. In every university, people connected to the Mubarak patronage network in power have been thrown out. There's been mini-revolutions in every library, in every city council across Egypt. And when I knew for sure that the revolution was successful was when the State Security Service, Amdalwa, was penetrated and its archives opened by the Egyptian people. The State Security Service, which Suleiman had been in control of, which was Egypt's Stasi, was engaged in burning all its archives. Such was its belief that it would be held to account. They shredded hundreds of thousands of documents, smashed hard drives. In the process of doing so, drew such attention to themselves through the rising smoke and the dump trucks exiting, that the people of Cairo stepped forward en masse and penetrated the State Security Service. The Security Service has now been officially disbanded, and those archives can now be bought in Cairo markets for $3 a file. They are spreading all over the internet, and an organisation has started called Dalwa Leaks, using our logo. Actually, a better version, I think. If you have a look, it has a sort of an amnesty candle mixed. And that is when you know that a people have truly been successful, when the archives have been opened, when there has been a loss of the control of information at this most basic level. In the United States crackdown on us, we have seen a privatization of censorship, which is more subtle than the censorship that we are all used to. But I say to you, there is no difference between taking a journalist from their home in the night with a gun and taking the home from a journalist in the day with a gun. That in fact, economic censorship by the state or by quasi-state bodies, giant corporations, is in fact every bit as pernicious as the censorship that we have all read about coming out of the Soviet Union. We had MasterCard, Visa, Moneybookers, PayPal, Western Union, and other companies involved in the financial sector all conduct an economic embargo on us, entirely outside the judicial process, entirely even outside the administrative process. It does not just include American companies. It includes Visa Europe, which is headquartered here in London, which is nominally a British company. How is it that these major institutions that are meant to be independent from the state act in this manner at the behest of the United States? Because they're not even acting at the behest of the United States people. They're not acting within a court of law. Rather, they are acting at the behests of a global system of patronage, which has its centre of gravity in Washington, but reaches in to all these companies. That is something that needs to be resisted aggressively. We saw Bank of America recently brief US intelligence corporations to try and take us down, to take down supportive journalists in the United States, such as Glenn Greenwald, to do it through one of the largest Washington law firms, so the contract would be protected by client-attorney privilege. And the fee for that service from 3 intelligence companies was billed to them to be $2 million per month. That is the entire budget of WikiLeaks per year. So although we are up against great odds, actually it is amazing to see what we, together with some support, have achieved simply by sticking to our principles and accepting the help of others from around the world where we were able to. The support that we received from journalists, while at times very strong, did not include the New York Times. And perhaps that should not come as such a surprise. Although in Virginia, right now, there is a secret grand jury trying to work out how to charge us, and me personally, with espionage. It's not the first time the US Espionage Act has been used to attempt to stifle criticism. Eugene Debs, a firebrand union leader in the United States, was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for breaking the Espionage Act, for speaking out against World War I in a famous pacifist speech. The New York Times, in its editorial beforehand, claimed that Debs was a lawbreaker at large, an enemy of the human race, and there had been quite enough talk about warrants. It is time to cease mouthing and begin. Debs should be jailed and the disorder his bad teaching has engendered must be squelched. It is well to remember that no friends of the government of the United States are ever killed by its soldiers, only enemies. And that is something that has not changed, at least not very much. The New York Times campaigns at an editorial level against us. One of the largest stories to come out of the Afghan war logs, the story about Task Force 373, a secret US assassination squad operating in Afghanistan, working its way down a list of some 2,000 people without any judicial oversight, opposed by the government of Afghanistan, discovered by us, became the front page of the German weekly Der Spiegel, was reported in The Guardian, and for our third partner, the New York Times, was indeed written by their national security reporter Eric Schmidt and was canned by Bill Keller and never made it into the paper. So that is the reality that we are dealing with. On the one hand, tremendous support from reformists across the world, from young people, and on the other hand, attacks from the very peak of media power and financial power in the United States and in the Western world more broadly. And now some questions. Thank you.
There will be more time for capping later. Thank you very much for the talk, Julian. Can I just remind you that if you are going to ask a question, please keep it relevant to the talk that we just heard from Julian. Do we have a question to start? Yes, sir.
Julian, thanks very much for coming here. It's amazing. You spoke of supporters of yours going onto government websites in Tunisia, I think it was, changing the DNS entry to point to other random websites. Now, I can imagine if I went back to my room now and did that with the UK government websites, at very least I'd be shipped back home down south. At very worst, I can't imagine the consequences. What are your feelings of operating within the law and outside the law in terms of freedom of speech?
There have been, to my knowledge, 6 raids on our supporters here in the UK who were not careful to cover their tracks. There have been at least 42 raids by the FBI in the United States. And so I would say to you, actually, that's a very low chance of being caught. Because we have a lot of supporters. So perhaps with a little care, that doesn't happen. In relation to operating within law or with outside the law, the rule of law is a very important thing. But when the rule of law starts to break down, and when human life is on the line, then it is time to operate within a system of ethics and to predict where the future will lie, to predict what the laws will be. It is not enough to simply go, today the law makes something illegal or legal. We all know of cases of the law being an ass. It is legal to do this. It is legal in Israel to apply reasonable physical pressure during an interrogation. And yet, there are not many here who would agree that it should be correct for there to be a law that permits torture. There is no easy answer to operating inside the law of one nation or the law outside another nation. But I have to mention one point. In our work, there are many amateur Supreme Court judges. They often have badges that say general on the front of them, and they are often CEOs of corrupt banks. And they are often journalists who have no stories to write, so they write critical opinion. Those people do not understand the law. If we take a United States context, what the law is what the Supreme Court decides in the end, after all constitutional, legal and political considerations are taken into account. It is not what the Prime Minister of Australia said it was when she said that I was engaged in illegal acts. In fact, a Commission of Inquiry in Australia found just the opposite. So there is a great abuse by powerful people to try and say the law is what they say it is, as opposed to all the fine points of a good system of law, which includes, in the common law tradition, all the common law tradition, and the US includes parts of common law and includes constitutional law. I'm not saying that one, even within that system, one should never break what the Supreme Court may say to be the law. In fact, I believe there are many circumstances where one, in fact, must do so, and it is then up to history to judge whether those actions were right or not.
You talked about the danger of having private information public information in the hands of private organizations. But WikiLeaks is a private organization with a lot of information in its hands. And you guys get to decide as an organization in what order the information is released. And presumably, you can sort of tell a different story depending on what you release first, and you can sort of change the focus depending on that order. Do you do anything to try to control bias when you decide what information is released?
We lost $5 million at least as a result of the financial embargo, the illegal financial embargo. Had we had those resources, perhaps we could release everything as fast as possible. In a situation where we have more supply than our ability to get through it, we have to prioritise, and that is unfortunate, and we do not like it. A year and a half ago, our resources were approximately equal to the amount of material we were receiving. So there are various economic and technical schemes that we have been working on to address that bottleneck, although at the moment it is rather difficult to resource those to the degree that they should be because of all the attacks. For controlling for bias, actually we cannot control for bias. It is simply not possible in any group of human beings making a decision. However, in general we try to publish what we receive first, but another one of our commitments to our sources is to maximise impact. And a commitment that we have to the project as a whole, it is not simply that we want to be engaged in this type of publishing. We have a goal, And our goal is to achieve just reform by this type of publishing. So that means choosing material, if we have limited resources, that are most likely to have the greatest impact. Of course, that by greatest impact in that sense, we mean in the direction of positive reform to create a more civil international order and civil society. And that, of course, is clouded with our personal biases, but I think it should be clear after our 4 years of publishing history to our sources what our biases, such as they are, indeed are.
Do you think, as a consequence of the release of information by organizations such as yours, governments will stop recording information and rely more on word of mouth and face-to-face meetings and still go ahead with business as usual?
Not if they want to survive, is my answer. And that is something I thought about in detail in 2006, because when making these proposals and discussing my ideas with my colleagues and friends, that was precisely the objection. And I thought about this, and I wondered why they write things down at all at the moment. And then we had the situation in 2007 when we released the main manuals for Guantanamo Bay. And in those manuals, which were used by over 1,000 soldiers at the Guantanamo base, and there have been many through that base, it stated that records should be falsified, although it didn't use that word, but falsified to keep them from the Red Cross, of who was there for the first month that they were there. And during the first month, the interrogation regime was meant to be as hard as possible. Everyone goes in to Guantanamo Bay at the maximum penalty and punishment level, which is only drawn down as a result of compliance with interrogation. And that fact was hidden from the Red Cross and explicitly put on paper to do so. Why would someone do that? Because that type of policy came from General Miller, and ideologically came to him from Donald Rumsfeld. And it is simply not possible to get grunts to carry out work at scale without writing it down. That if you want to have a large organisation carry out systematic work, you have to write it down. Otherwise, the periphery of the organisation starts wandering off and diverging from what the centre wants it to do. In other words, it is not possible to conduct systematic, large-scale abuses without leaving a paper trail. And that means if large organisations choose to not write things down, choose not to have a paper trail, they will be placed in a position where they cannot effectively control the systematisation of their operations, which means that they will be inefficient organisations compared to those organisations that do leave a paper trail, which means they will be selected out of the competing bureaucracy and global economy.
Hi. Bradley Manning is still currently being imprisoned for his role as a whistleblower. In his recent book, your ex-colleague Daniel Schmidt alleges that WikiLeaks no longer has the operational capacity to defend or to protect its sources. Is this true, and is this what happened with Bradley Manning?
I don't think Julian's going to be able to answer that question.
No problem.
Can we take another question?
No. I have to be very careful about speaking about Mr. Manning for obvious reasons. Or perhaps some aren't obvious. One is his legal situation, which is precarious. The other is that our support to his plight cannot be stated too loudly. Of course, he is a young man embroiled as a result of our publishing activities. We have no idea whether he's one of our sources, directly or indirectly. All our technology is geared up to make sure we have no idea, because the easiest way to keep a secret from powerful state intelligence organisations is to never have it in the first place. But he is in a terrible situation, and if he's not connected to us, he is there as an innocent, embroiled in this. And if he is in some manner connected to our publications, then of course we have some responsibility. That said, there is no allegation being made that he was arrested as a result of anything to do with us. Rather, the allegation is that his arrest was as a result of him speaking to Wired magazine in the United States, who betrayed him.
I think we have time for one last question. Yeah.
Have you ever come across any information considered too dangerous to publish and it's not leaked or anyone?
Well, I do hope so. The answer is no, we have not. And that is because we have a harm minimization procedure. So it's very important for us as a philosophical goal to censor as little as possible, and in the long run, not censor at all. And what I mean by that is that we extend a promise to our sources that provided their materials of diplomatic, political, ethical or historical significance hasn't been published before and is being actively suppressed by legal or extra-legal means, then we will publish it, for sure, within whatever resource limits that we have. So, and we'll publish it all. So we are then left with a position where sometimes material has information in it that might possibly harm someone. It is very rare, but it sometimes happens. So our position is to strip the harm from it in some manner. So that does not necessarily mean censorship. That can mean notifying, say, people named in material before publication and then publishing. It can mean redacting certain portions of the material and notifying, and then publishing early so we don't have to delay as long. But I think there is no case that I can imagine where delay for some period would not be enough to strip all harm. And that is also a procedure which is tremendously abused, of course, by National Archives bodies that after, say, a 50-year period or 30-year period, cabinet material is released without any redactions at all. And I cannot see a case where that is not sufficient. I believe that it is extremely dangerous for us to do that at all, and that we are on a very slippery slope by doing it. And nonetheless, it is the real politic, and perhaps in certain cases right, for us to do that. The postal system does not have postal workers looking at all your envelopes. Well, they probably look at all of mine. But does not have postal workers, as a rule, looking at everyone's envelopes, the interior of their envelopes, to understand whether the information being sent is right. Similarly, the telephone system shouldn't have people listening to every telephone call you make and hanging up in the middle if they don't like what you have to say. You should have the right to speak to your grandmother about anything you want without a censor body sitting in the middle of the conversation and deciding it is time to hang up. Similarly, when you send an email, the default assumption is that you have the right and you should be entitled to transmit everything. And if there is some restitution to be made for harm, then it should come after. It should not be a form of prior restraint. I think prior restraint in all its forms, including the form that we engage in, is very dangerous.
And on that note, I think we'll have to end things there. Before we end, can I just ask everyone to remain seated for a few more minutes until we get Julian and the first couple of rows out the chamber. But Julian, thank you so much for